Okay, so hello, thank you. This is Tree doing a code review of the mod MJO MedKit. I picked this mod up from the GitHub and it's from Don Alfredo. He asked me to do it just to see if there's any ways it could be better because he wants to have this open source. So, for anyone that's watching, this is how I would review some code and probably some potential, I don't say pitfalls, but things in your code, if you're a new modder, that you're probably doing that. You've probably copied from somewhere else, which is where it came from here. So let's just jump right into it. So I pulled this mod from GitHub. I pulled it using my command line, pulled into my P drive, and so it's here. When I look at it, the initial, I guess, thing that comes out in my mind is, it's going to sit here in the P drive. It's going to be named MJO combat medkit. Personally, I don't like hyphens, but granted, like in the Linux world, that's fine. I just think that sometimes they can be a little bit weird. Again, personal preference, not a big deal. I come in here. This is a hidden folder Git. This is for the GitHub stuff. You can ignore this as a developer or modder. I have a data folder, which is probably going to contain the information. Normally, I have my textures in here, but it seems like they've included the P3D. That's fine. I think that's okay. And there's also a folder called scripts, which is where the scripts are held. And that is going to be defined in the CFG mods here that we can see in the background. We're good there. And the config CPP. The config CPP is what defines a mod or an add-on in this case. I use that word deliberately because an add-on delineates a thing that can be loaded into the game. An add-on can have multiple PBOs, but an add-on is a singular workshop item, whereas a mod can be a PBO or an add-on. So that's another thing that's kind of a nuance there. So anyway, Macaros is going to expect the config CPP, which is good. It's at the highest level folder. So I'm going to go and close this file explorer and go into my VS Code. And this is kind of what it looks like in my P drive. All right, let's dissect this config CPP. The config CFG patches is going to define what you put in the required add-on if you were going to override this mod. So let's say you wanted to add a new slot to the medkit, or you wanted to do anything else with it, you would want to put this name in the required add-ons of your mod. All right. Notice here now we have CFG mods, and it's named the same. So personally, I've personally started differentiating between my CFG mods and my CFG patch, and so CFG mod is only needed if you have a scripts folder. So I see sometimes that this file, the CFG mods entry, is present in the config CPP, and there are no scripts. And that's technically wrong because you don't have any scripts. You don't need to define any of these modules, like this world module here that I'm highlighting. Like, this wouldn't exist if you didn't have scripts. And so if you don't have scripts, don't include this. If you do have scripts, I normally do something like this, where I call my CFG patch the script, and I keep the CFG mod name the name of my mod. And the reason why I do that is because Alfredo did the correct thing here and said this class name can be used as the if def inside of the classes. And this is correct. Daisy added a new thing where you can, where by default, any CFG mod entry is going to be created as a define. And so originally you had modders that would make their own defines, and you have to include those files here. You don't have to do that anymore. And so that's why I think having the delineated name here is important, because as a new modder, when you're seeing the if def inside of the scripts, you might be wondering, oh, well, is it the CFG patch that we're putting there, or is it the CFG mod? And unless you have talked to me or somebody who knows what they're talking about that can tell you this, you wouldn't know by just looking. And so that's the number one reason why I think having different names here is important and should be required and is considered good practice. That way, when somebody else is learning how to mod, it can be very easily intuitively understood, well, however you say that, that this is the thing that is the fdef, not the CFG patches. And if I did this, you'd wonder, like, oh, well, I could just go use the fdef for a CFG patch, and that would just be wrong. So that's what I would do there. Okay. Also, this stuff is not required. You don't need any of that. You just need the required add-ons. Going in here, MedKit, that's fine. Picture action. So pictures, if you wanted a picture inside of the workshop browser when they had the game loaded, not really needed. Author ID, external type mod, these are irrelevant, not really needed. The version is kind of important in terms of like differentiating between one mod versus the next, one version versus the next. Okay, so dependencies, right? So you might have seen in the tree scripting video that I talk about inheritance and the levels of the game in hierarchy that are in existence. And most notably, I'm in my P drive here. If I go to scripts, you'll see 1 core, 2 game lib, 3 game, 4 world, 5 mission. The dependencies here are those things. So if you wanted to override some core stuff, or sorry, add some core stuff, you can't actually override core or game lib. You would add one, core here, and you'd add game lib. But in this case, since we are only modifying for a world here, as I can see here, we only need to add the dependency for a world. And as such, in the defs, you need to add where that script is, which is good. So we're good here. We'll collapse that. We'll collapse that. Now we're talking about the CFG vehicles in the game. In DayZ, everything is basically a vehicle unless it's a weapon or a player or a slot. And so CFG vehicles is like defining objects in the game that have a simulation and can do things. A bandage is a vehicle, a car is a vehicle, a crate is a vehicle. That's just the way DayZ works. Personally, I would have had this CFG vehicle class in its own config. And the reason why I would do that is because I would basically have my scripts folder, like I would have something like this where I would open it up, I'd have a new folder, and I would have something like medical, right? And then inside of here, I'd have the config.cpp. Why is this not collapsing? Come on, collapse. And I would take all of this stuff and I would put it in here with its own CFG patch and stuff like that. And again, the reason why is because when we have CFG mods, okay, so the reason why, again, is because if we have CFG mods, this is automatically indicating that we have a script folder. And I would put scripts in their own PBO inside of my add-on, okay? So I would remove that. This CFG patch and CFG mod would be directly related to my scripts. And this would sort of contain that. And my medical would contain the actual medical stuff. Okay. And I would actually pull the actual data for the medical stuff inside of the medical PBO. And so if you were to look at the high level hierarchy, you would see medical, scripts, and then config CPP. And then this would very much follow the vanilla structure of like, okay, I have gear, and then I have my config CPP. I have my cooking stuff, and I have my config CPP. And so you might be saying, well, Tree, like, shouldn't you put the config CPP for the scripts inside of the scripts folder? And I would then say, yes, we should. However, we at least need some config CPP to pack the PBO into this folder. We need at least one config CPP in this, inside of this folder. That way we get a single mod, single PBO that gets packed out. That's called MJO Combat MedKit. And so I kind of combine the scripts into the main config CPP. And that is a personal preference. So you can kind of do what you feel. I feel like this is good enough because this is nice and clean. Basically, here's our mods. Here's our, and given that I've said it that way, you might say, well, CFG patches should be this, and then this can be scripts, and that's definitely valid. All right, definitely valid. This is what I would call in programming a religious debate. The outcome is the same. I get nicely delineated names for my required add-ons. It's just the name of it and the expression of it is different. And so like it's whatever you want to do there. Okay. So let's go ahead and move past some of that 101 architecture sort of high level stuff. Let's actually talk about the P3D and how this stuff is set up. So when I look into this file, I see we have tent, we have a medkit tent, medkit close kit. It inherits from tent. We have a medkit open. It inherits from close kit. We have a medkit close bleed kit. Inherits from this close kit, and we have a medkit open bleeds, medkit close bleed. And so just from the names themselves, like, and I'm trying to be ignorant as possible here because we want the code to be its own documentation without documentation in here. And so the first things is like these are obviously med kits that can open and close, and they have something to do with bleeds and illnesses. Not much more. Okay. Let's open it up. Combat med kit. Once placed, this med kit delivers health to you and your comrades within a certain radius. Once the healing timer runs out, the combat med kit deletes itself. So use it wisely. Okay. It's got a rotation flag of 4. This controls how it spawns in the world, its orientation, size of the item, its weight. A fizz layer is a good one. You probably have noticed this if you've made an object that you can pass through it. Without this fizz layer item large, your object won't actually have collision in the game. This is not a common question in the modders Discord. Common pitfall for a new modder. Projection type name is a new thing. If you're copying from some older mods, you'll notice that they don't have this and that they're using their own holograms and kits and stuff. And that's just the old way of doing it. The new hologram way is you can provide any class name inside of this projection type name, and it will be the object you see when you click deploy. And so basically, vanilla has enabled the option for you to turn any item into a deployable object, which will show the object to deploy. And that's important because in the future, we don't necessarily need this tent base that we have on here, which is most likely being hijacked for its like hidden selection and placing logic. Yeah, okay. That's what I thought here. We have placing here. And so this is I would consider this a alternative good practice. It's not how I would do kits, but this works. And if we're trying to stick purely to vanilla, this is a good approach, I would say. But not one that I would use, mainly because I personally don't like putting all of my data inside of the P3D, which is what the tent base does, or what tents do. Essentially, it's a P3D. It contains all the information inside of it, and then you hide and show those selections based on animations. And I think that's a bit heavy for the tents or for like these placeable objects. If we were talking about like a building or something larger, like a bunker, then yeah, I would go with this approach. And I actually did go with this approach with my mining mod that you've probably seen. Global health. This is probably good. Oh, okay. So one thing that's important, if you're going to define global health, you need to define their health levels. You need to go to vanilla, grab some of the health levels, because otherwise you're going to shoot it and it's going to stay pristine, and it won't let you know that it's damaged. And that's a big deal in my opinion. Okay, hidden selection textures. This is good. Note that sometimes if you define hidden selection materials, this will override the damage levels. I've seen it happen in some objects. I'm not sure why it happens, but I normally ignore this, leave that out, and just define the RV mat inside of the P3D, unless I have a inheriting item that also modifies the material, in which case I do define it here because the default variant needs its selection defined. Okay. Moving on, we have some scope 1s, and so these aren't meant to be spawned. So they're builders. Object builders. So I assume this is scope 1 because you're placing them by script. Probably has something to do with the trigger. Item behavior. Item behavior is a thing. If you notice yourself going to the floor and drinking stuff, it's because of this. You don't have it set. All right, this stuff is good. Let's look at the P3D. Okay, let's actually look at all this stuff. Um, Textures for the SMDI. It's 2K. I never go above 1K. There's really no reason to, in my opinion, but that's fine. Unless it's like a building. I don't know how big this thing is yet. I haven't looked in game. And like, yeah, when I look at something like this, again, a 2K texture, we're not utilizing the space very well. Look at that. We have so many of these flat single space areas. Like this is a poorly, or I shouldn't say poorly, but it's an unoptimized layout of the UV map. And in reality, if you're gonna say that I need to download this thing at 3.5 megs for this, like I don't know, you probably get the same roughly out of 1K. Looks like we got a bunch of different I see. Okay, yeah, so these are saline bags that are flat. So you could probably just overlay those if you even built this yourself. If not, if this was like a Sketchfab model, I would just 100% dump this down to 1K. No need to make people download this. Okay, these are okay. All good there. Let's look at the RV mat. The RV mat, oof. Okay, so my first impression when I see the RV mats like this, like with just 111s, that is not very good. That's basically you've turned the power and intensity of all of your things to the max. I would probably go for something like class fabric, maybe. What's this? Tent pristine. Oh, you can probably hear my dog in the background. Sorry. And fence fabric detail. Floral emerald. Where did that even come from? Okay, hold on. So what I'm doing now is I'm like going to fabric. I'm gonna see what this looks like. Okay, it's called fabric ground. It's weird. We're gonna open it in Makeros, right? Oh, okay. So it doesn't actually have a ground tarp. DZ camping data ground. Okay, that's where we'll go. DZ gear camping data ground tarp work. Ground tarp. Okay, cool. Oh, gross. Okay, this one does the same thing too. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, I would be trying to find a better texture, like maybe a flag. Yeah. I'd grab the flags RV mat, and I would take this. Actually, no, I wouldn't copy the specular. That's kind of specular is what makes your stuff glow. All right, so let's go ahead and see. I do something like this where because like cloth isn't shiny, right? Like, and so why would it be very lit? Right. So you have and when you think about think about the different types of light we have. Ambient light is like the sunlight. It's the light that's always there. It's underneath shadows. It's inside of buildings that are that are closed off but have windows. You have diffused light, which is a flashlight. So you've brought a light inside, you're shining it around, and it illuminates things from inside. And then you have specular, which is the reflective lighting. So you shine a light on the you have a light shining and it shines on top of a puddle in the room and that puddle reflects light into your eye. Or another way of saying is you're walking down a street on the Las Vegas Strip and you look in the road and you can see the sheen of the lights in a puddle, and that's specular lighting. And so you wouldn't have that type of lighting on cloth, right? That doesn't make sense. And also the power of that specular light would be very low in the area. Okay. Force diffuse is like how much light actually is like pushed onto the object. It's just a minimum. clamp, mind you. The pixel shader, we don't want trees because basically that would make it invisible as you get closer. You want the super shader. And plant wind. Okay, so we're not going to do any flying. All right, oh, I put that in the ground tarp. Whoops. So I would take this and go here and put that in here. Force diffuse. I would give it a little bit of force diffuse. You want some light. It's not zero. Okay, and there's that. Okay. And looking at the rest of this stuff, we're good. Stage 1's great. Our transforms are fine. These are matrices basically. And 1 and 1 is this is like an identity matrix. When we think of it, what is an identity matrix? It's like the number 1 when you multiply stuff. Like 5 times 1 is 5. It's what you get back, what you get in. Okay, the Fresnel. This is another one where I would probably take the tarp here and I would copy it in. People sometimes call it a Fresnel. It's a French word, Fresnel, by a mathematician. And the Fresnel is the profile of light expression on a material. So you know how like rubber looks differently when you shine a light on it versus metal or plastic? The Fresnel is the mathematical representation of that. And there is a well-defined, these are well-defined values in tables. Normally I find a DAISY item and I'll copy it. But in this case, you could technically go to a website and get like an actual Fresnel value. I think there are a couple tools out there that you can get Fresnel expressions. Like you can actually test to see what it looks like. I'm not terribly interested in it. I'm not a graphics designer, so I don't really know more than the math side. Stage 7 is how does the item either it's like reflect off of the world, or how does the world reflect on the item? And so in this case, the texture is the land environment, and so like the sky would be in the lighting. In this case, we don't want that. We want this like neutral heading for cloth. Okay, so now that we've kind of done that, let's look at the CFG. This is what's needed to define the actual P3D. It's looking like you have created one CFG per P3D. I'm personally against that, and mainly because I appreciate the convenience of inheritance. And what I mean by that is if you look at these two files, and if I were to flip between them, they're practically the same, right? I'm going to flip through them, and a acute eye would notice that the only thing in here that has changed is this part here, right here, that I've highlighted, open and closed. And so from my perspective, that's a lot of, as a programmer, it's a lot of duplicated code. And I would prefer to do something along the lines of this. This is auto-generated stuff. That's a comment we can ignore. And I wish there's a better linter or like error checker for this stuff, but it's not. I would just do something like this and have a single model.cfg. Mainly because as you start adding more and more items, and let's see, let me show the extreme side version of that. Okay, so in this case, you have one CFG for every item, and I have one model config for every item. And in my opinion, there should be a healthy medium in between, because eventually you do have too many things for a single file. And so I think personally, I would add a model config for each major data folder. So I would have like one model config for my medical, one model config for my structures, one model config for my vehicles, and things like that, just so that you don't get this monolithic file, 1,400 lines of configurations. And it can get cumbersome, and making a single mistake in this file breaks all of the things. And so there's definitely a religious argument in there, and usually the answer here is somewhere in the middle. So either way, what you have here works and is good. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the actual P3D. Start with the closed version first. Okay, no. So this is just. Oh, actually, hold on. Let's go with closed. Let's look at the open one. Okay, so yeah, it's not a tent. So going back to our previous discussion about the textures, 2K textures for something this large, you only have 3,000 faces. There's really no need to have a 2K texture for something like this. That's a lot of overhead for something so small and for so little detail. To be fair. Okay, so jumping in, our first notion here, it's that's only 1,900 faces, 2,000 points, 3,200 faces. So it's a relatively low poly model already. We can see over here we have some LODs. Technically, these should start at 0. Okay. And you'll also want LOD no shadow for performance reasons at 0 here. I mean, you would put that in all of these here. LOD no shadow. This allows people with poor performing PCs to not choke. Cool. All right, so there's that. If I were to press Control A and then E to enter in the MedKit or enter in the face properties, like the textures and materials assigned, you'll notice that we have a TGA. Why do you have a TGA here? That could be an issue. That could be maybe a dev thing for GitHub. I would expect that to be a PA though. In any case, that's a problem. How I would fix that would be I'd go into Tools, Mass Texture Renaming Editor, and I would then, oh yeah, see, I don't know what this thing is either. There's obviously some faces in here that haven't been addressed. But I would probably personally, since I have a single selection and I know that the entire texture applies to the whole object, I would just rename. First off, I would delete everything. And then I would re-add everything. So combat medic, medical data, PAA, MedKit, and then RV mat, apply. And I can probably now look at it in my Blender or my object builder, excuse me, well, bulldozer. Ugh. Yeah, good. Yeah, no need for 4K, 2K texture for this. Might need better SMDI though. Yeah, the light's reflecting weird off of that. I thought this was cloth at first, and so I would go back probably and change the RV mat to something that's more either plasticky or metally, depending on what you want. If it's metal, I'd go with the ammo box, and if it's plastic, I would go with probably the Chemlight or epoxy pen, epoxy putty. That's a good one. Okay, so now that I've got that set up, I'm gonna duplicate right points, merge near. This merge near stuff is not necessarily a great idea if you have multiple selections or doing a vehicle, and I usually go down until about 300 faces, so points here. Perfect, that's good enough. All right, geometry. I'm gonna click this. Okay, we're good there. Make sure you have mass defined. This might be a little heavy. I'd probably bump that down to 10. That's in the kilograms, so 100 kilograms. That's huge, hugely heavy. Auto center equals 0. This is great. Make sure everything always has an auto center. If you wanted to make sure this thing couldn't be climbed, It's important for a lot of structures or for containers. Placeable things, people will put them next to bases and they'll vault over them. The component's great. Our memory points, bounding box, max, min, in view, max, min. This is what controls the inventory view when you press tab or inspect. CE center, CE radius. This is what determines how big an item is when it's trying to spawn something in, like placing on a shelf or something. Land contact is to help out the points at which it can roll. I normally don't put any land contacts in my P3Ds, mainly because my geometry handles that fairly well. View geometry. This is actually one of the more important ones. That looks like the normals are weird. Normals are pointing in the weird direction. Huh. Either way, the view geometry is what determines how an item can be interacted with. And so if you have an action on your object and you're wondering like, hey, why is it not picking up? Well, it's probably because you don't have a view geometry with a component inside. This is what really determines if an action can be targeting something or not. Aside from other things, but this is a pretty common one. Yeah. Fire geometry. We have one component. Really? This is just one component? Never seen a complex thing like this. Personally, I never make my geometries this complex. My fire geometries, unless it's like a vest. I mean, this is a briefcase, right? So when you think about a briefcase, nobody's going to be hiding behind this thing. The millimeter of protection this might afford, you just whoop, and now the handle doesn't give you anything, and this is basically just as good as what you had before with far fewer points, which makes the checking a lot easier. You want these objects to be relatively simple. And I know there's a lot of people will challenge me on this, but personally, this is good enough for a briefcase, for a container, for anything square, right? We don't need anything in that big. If I want it to have sounds when it's hit, I'm going to go to my penetration folder. So it's DZ data penetration. And since this is going to be give it a cast iron sound. Boom, done. Okay. And that's everything from there. I assume the closed. That's what I was just at. Assume opened is very much the same. Camo. Oh god, it's okay. So this one is nuts. Okay, like I personally would never put something like this on my server, mainly because this is 10k points, 17,000 faces for such a small thing that everyone's gonna want. Ugh. Like I personally would probably, delete some of the higher poly things. And to be fair, I might even turn these into proxies so that they're not actually there all the time. Something like this. And you can kind of see as a survival game, it kind of makes sense for this not to be full all the way, because that would indicate that we're not in an apocalypse, right? So just by a little bit of pruning, we got this down to 10,000 faces, which is, in my opinion, a little bit better. A little bit more reflective of what's up. I probably wouldn't put the syringe in there. I might have gone in Blender and seen which one of these is the most and deleted them from there. I think these circular ones are pretty egregious, man. Don't need all these circles. All right, that's good. And same thing, LOD no shadow. Geometry is good. Okay, so in here, again, same thing with the geometry. The geometry needs to be simple shapes. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues in the game. And so for this, I would basically do something along the lines of this. Right, I'd make this shape here. And then I would make one more. Oops, wrong way. All right. I'll delete this one. Get empty. Structure. Topology. Find components. All right, and then Control A to grab them all, give them both a mass of 10. And that's what I would do. In my opinion, there are fewer points in this setup than what you had, and the geometry is far more concise, which allows the game to calculate the physics of this thing a lot easier. And so then I would take this, right, and I'd go into view geometry, right, and I'll just boom. Or right, I would just have a single one that says, oh, you can only interact with the the base. So now if you had an action, the action would only show up if you're looking at this part. It wouldn't show if you're looking at this top part. And it's one way you can use to segment what the player can look at to do an action. When you're talking about like a console, right? If you had like a laptop and you wanted each key to be accessible, you'd need 26 keys, one for each letter of the alphabet. Or let's say a bunker, right? You'd have your doors, and then you'd have one view component over here on the side, which you would be able to look at to like open the doors and stuff. So view geometry is really powerful. In the Modders Discord, I have a couple posts on it, mostly related to gardening, because that's one of the more complex expressions of a view geometry and actions. And then lastly, going to the fire geometry, yeah, let's go in, 40 points, 38 faces. Let's get rid of that for in favor of 16 points, 12 faces, and then, give them their penetration. In this case, it's a, again, cast iron. I'm done. And then we're done here. Cool. Technically, you could, and it's interesting. There's another discussion here that could be about a single P3D that just uses an animation to swap between open and close. I'm not going to cover that here. I only bring it up because of this. I assume that's just because you're trying to hook into the script-based version of placing. Let's go. Let's start talking about the script stuff. Let's start with your MedKit. This is where I would start with the object that I created. First things first, I personally like the pattern of class my base item underscore color extends item base. Right. And then I would say put common functionality shared by all here. So that would be examples, something like the trigger behavior, since it's the same, and then probably the deployment stuff, something along those lines. And then you would have your my variant item. That way And this way, what you're doing here is you're essentially establishing a hierarchy. You're saying this one class is going to be my main class that does most of the heavy lifting. It's what's going to define what my thing is, so that in my script world, if I want to know if the object I'm looking at is my thing, I can easily check it based on this class. You can usually easily do an is inherited of my base class, which makes checking for actions and other Boolean based logics very quick and easy. And it opens up a whole new world of just usage. And so, basically when I see something like this, I would probably have something along the lines of like, let's put this in concrete words relative to your example. So I would probably have like a class MJO medical placing kit, color base. Okay. Okay. And this would be, this class would be a parent to all the kits for this, for the medical items of this mod. So basically anything that's going to be a placeable kit, I would essentially inherit and extend this mod. And so when I look at kits here, I see two of them. And actually it seems like you've missed your own inheritance here. I would expect you to do something like this, where the close would go on both of those closes here, which is what we're trying to do. It's basically set up here. I would have a kit that represents all of the kits that I could place. Okay. And then I would have something along the lines of class MJO medical placing kit bleed. And then illness, right? And then, probably somewhere in this thing here, you would have like a protected string type, right? And inside of this constructor, you could do something along the lines of this. Okay, and then for illness, we would do the same thing. Okay. And now you have, it's no different than what you have here, except for the fact that we have these triggers, close and close, right? We have these two triggers, and I'm not sure if you made those or, yeah, okay, cool. You made them. Excellent. When I think about these triggers, you have three of them. And you see how you've defined them each in here individually, and it feels like you've done the same thing in multiple different places, essentially rewritten the code the same way, right? And I bet you were thinking to yourself, man, I bet there's a easier way to do this so I don't have to do all that duplication. And there is. And so in this case, I would say something along the lines of, my medical placing kit color base is going to have a trigger. All right, we'll name it medical trigger. And then we would have something along the lines of protected bool underscore is created equals false, right? So then just by looking at this, I can get rid of that. Is deployable. It's true. cool. They're all going to be placeable. Okay. I either like putting the actions at the very top or the very bottom. In this case, I'll put them at the very top. And on placement started. Oh, actually, let's look at this real quick. There's a lot of logic happening in here. What's going on this one here? Same thing. Yeah, same stuff. So we are going to say retrieve the hidden selections, get the player base. Now this only works because on placement started is a client function. Oh wait, no, this might be a server function. It gives us it. Personally, I prefer this way of casting. So this way of casting is unsafe, like having unprotected sex. Okay, I would do this instead. Class.cast, dude. This is an automatic null check and cast. Okay, get the hidden selections. So if the hidden selections exist, try to cast the player, get the hidden selections. You don't really need to do this. You could just say if something like that. You can just do that. Right? If it is a multiplayer service. Okay. Get rid of that. You might be like, well, Tree, you're going to be doing this call every single time this for loop goes. And I would say to you, don't opt. What you did with there was pre-optimize, and the compiler will make sure this only gets called once. So don't worry about that. Besides, you're already doing a for each on a hidden selection inside the medical. So like that's we're only looping over 2 or 3 things. So that's not really even a big deal. The n or number of times we're looping is small. So if it's dedicated server, okay, so we're refreshing the local or the that. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and just copy this whole function since we looked at it. Good there. Boom, and then on placement complete. Most likely this is where you were doing stuff to make sure your trigger was the actual type of trigger you cared about. Aha, so now you can tell that the only thing that changes between these mods is this bleeding trigger name. And so we're going to change this kit type. Turn that into a trigger type. Boom. Is it called illness removal trigger? You might. I'm not. If you've tested this in game and it works, then okay. But you might need to actually create a config object for the actual trigger, unless the trigger itself has that stuff. I'm just wondering how that create object works here with the bleeding trigger. I mean, this obviously works. Healing trigger. Oh, okay, you have it as illness removal. Okay. Never mind. Cool. And so we'll go through here and we'll look at all this stuff again. This is a server function if game is server and config exist. And personally, since you've built this mod, you should expect this is always present because you've set it on your mods. So in my opinion, I feel like that's a redundant thing. Get game that is dedicated server. I changed this because this handles all of the checks that you need. Projection type is not equal null. Item place. Here's another cast that I don't like here. So if cast.cast2 is that. And then there's this. Oh. Okay, so see what you've done here. You basically created an item, and then you created it, you cast it to an item base, and then you took your item and then casted it to the item that you wanted. In my opinion, you can just do that. Boom, done. And now we can just get rid of this placed item here. Boom, done. And so then you're like, well, but the MedKit, we don't have a base class of this. And I would then say, well, you do. You would have this guy here. Be open. So the main base item color base. Let's go ahead and rename that to something more useful for you. This would be MJO underscore medical object. Medical, maybe medical object deployed color base. And this one will be deployed bleeds. Okay. Illness, and then healing. Okay, so you have 3 of these things that are deployed. And I'm going to use this class name as my thing here. Okay. So I can get rid of this, the if check. Pull it up a little bit into here. Now we'll keep looking here. We have MedKit. Set the position, set the orientation, hide all of its selections. Okay. If the bleeding trigger, let's go ahead and get the generic one. If the regular trigger is not created, bleeding trigger, we can just turn that into the medical trigger. Okay. I'm gonna rename that to m underscore is trigger created. That way it reads a little bit nicer. If the trigger is not created, set the trigger created to true. Cast our medical trigger to the trigger type that we've set in our mod. Medical trigger, set the position. Otherwise, if we didn't create the item, then the trigger created is false. And then if the game is the client, so we'll do the opposite of this. Okay, hold on. We say if the game is a server and it's not the client, then delete, but we're already even in the old code, we were already only in the server. So we're going to go ahead and we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about that check. It's redundant. And then I would say object delete. Isn't there like delete safe? Yeah. Yeah. In which case we're already inside the item that we're doing, so I can just say delete safe. It's implied that there's a this here. Okay, so then now I can take this, boom, put it up into my main. Cool. And I can get rid of these now. So I've basically redone what you've done. So like if we go through your other code, like I'm going to just quickly review it because I don't think you have anything extra that wasn't already duplicated. The only thing that you did was just copy and pasted the first one, and then you changed the name of these triggers, which is a very common approach for a new developer or new scripter because that's what makes sense in terms of it works, right? It worked on this one. I'll just copy and paste it, and I don't need to change it, and it does work. The difference here is that you can save yourself the time because you build it once and then reuse it for everything else. And this is kind of the hallmark of programming. Oh, it looks like I got to do this stuff for the actual kit. Okay, so let's look at the open stuff. Actually make the one for healing as well. And then healing trigger. Okay, so we have the placed kits all working off of our base class, which is basically some class that has a trigger. It has whether or not the trigger is created and the type of the trigger. All of your code that you were doing for each individual one has been pulled out and made generic. And really the only thing that needed to change was this didn't need to change other than the class cast. This didn't need to change other than the name of the object as well as the name of the trigger type. And then a little bit of redundancy in terms of the cleaning up the conditions. All right, let's look at the open stuff now. We have an init, so whenever this thing is initialized, it checks to see if it's the server and calls delete safe on itself to, okay, so it has a 15-minute timer. Cool. It's got its own delete safe here. Delete self. Okay, so we can definitely change that with our delete safe. Right. The vanilla already provides us with something to do that. So let's go ahead and delete that, get rid of a little bit of code. This right here, I personally would turn this into a protected int trigger lifetime. And I would make that a default for now. That way you could have different triggers, have different things, and I'll show you how to change this here later. Again, I'm going to change this to is dedicated server. It's takeable. This basically means you can't take it into your hands. It's useful, can swap entities, false, good, can put in hands, false, put in attachments, false, can put in a container, false. Okay, cool. Basically, you're turning this into a static object. These are all correct. Looks like, again, duplicated code. In this case, the code is absolutely 100% duplicated and not even modified. So we're going to go ahead and just take all of this real quick. I'm just going to pull it out of there, and I want to put it into here, our main class. Easy peasy. So whenever this thing is initialized, we delete itself given its lifetime. We say it can't be taken, it can't be swapped, it can't be put into hands, can't be put as attachment, and it cannot be put in cargo. Awesome. Now, let's say we wanted some of these triggers to have different lifetimes. Well, we have a variable up here now defined that's being used in the EE-init. So all I really need to do is, I'm going to use some VS Code magic here. I highlight some similar pattern. Control D will select the duplicates. I now have a cursor head at each line, and so I press enter for a new line. I press right arrow to get inside the parentheses. I press enter for a new line. And now I'm going to build myself the guts of a constructor. And then we're going to go m underscore trigger lifetime equals 1500, because everything's the default, you know. I'm going to fill in the constructor names here. Okay. And let's say I want the bleeds. I want this thing to, you know, give more bleeds. So it's going to delete itself after 35 seconds. I want the illness to last 100. I want it to last 10 minutes, basically. Or 2 minutes, excuse me. And then I want the healing to be only an 8-second buff. Boom, there you go. And so now you have each of these 3 triggers that can be deployed at different lengths, all using the same code that you wrote earlier, right? And that's how I would review the code. And I would essentially, you know, we'd get rid of all of that. Okay. Let's go to this modded register item callbacks. This is boilerplate. Good. Let's look at the holograms. If is kit. Where is this is kit set? Oh, you make it yourself. Okay, cool. So in this case, instead of doing this, right? So this definitely works, especially since you have a reference to the parent. However, the way I would approach this would be, I would go into for world, I'd make a new folder called entities. I would drag your medkits into there. And then I would make a new file called modded underscore item base.c. And so modded class item base. And in here, I would make my own. I would say bool is, actually MJO is medical kit. Okay, so for all items, this would be false. But then inside of your med kit, come in here. Right, and so again, the benefit of your color base is that all of your other kits are inheriting from it, and so I don't even need to tell if these are kits. They automatically know they're kits because the parent's a kit. And so, and since I inherit the traits of my parent, I know that I'm a kit. And so now you can say something along the lines of, if action item dot is medical kit, and you can get rid of this. You might be saying, well, Tree, all you're really doing is moving the code around so that it's not in this class. And I would say, yes, I am, because in reality, hologram should not know anything about your class. It should have no code specific to your class, period. The item itself should know if it's a kit. That is what good encapsulation is. When you go to the store and you pay for something, you don't take your pants off and hand them to the cash register attendant and say, well, my wallet's in my pants, take it out and pay for it. No, you use the interface of a credit card, which in this case is this MJO is medical kit, and the wallet is the item that's being passed around. Okay, and so you can kind of see the hierarchical pattern that's approached here. Okay, cool. So cool. Another thing is, oh, you're probably doing this to make sure that it doesn't get crushed to the bottom, huh? Why are you doing this one here? See, I do the same thing because we turn off this, but I'm wondering why. Okay, so I'm gonna compare what you have here to vanilla, because first things first, when I see this function, I see a lot of math that shouldn't be changed, and then I see basically you here saying if it's not one of your kits, do vanilla. So I'm gonna check to see how close to vanilla you are, because this might just be, again, redundant code. So same, 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 same. Okay, so you're doing something here. Okay, so you're trying to do the head position. And then we have static should be defined outside of this class. Sorry, what I mean by that is they should be defined like up here. I know they do it here, but that's this is a bad practice. Looks like you get rid of this, which is Hit objects count dun 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 the same. Correct for a watchtower, it looks like. I am in the same boat when we talk about overriding this function. I do the same thing here. And in reality, I probably shouldn't, because I'm trying to get rid of this bounding box thing, but see, even I did a copy paste here. My code. I need to go back and fix that. This is fine. What I would probably do and change is basically say item base, item in hands, if class get item in hands if that do our logic, which would eventually, return some vector. And then we would do something like this at the end. Right, and so the reason why I do it this way is because I want to create a clear path for my code, and then say anything else that doesn't match that path is vanilla. You know, you kind of had the same thing here, but you were relying on functions that were built inside of the game. So if it's not a kit, if it's not one of our kits, do the thing, Julie. But in this case, it's if it's our item, do stuff. Otherwise, do vanilla. So it's a little bit of a, I, I guess it's a little bit of an inverse of thinking. It's basically the same outcome. My stuff will happen before vanilla in any case, but that's okay. And this is how I would sort of override this class. And if you notice, basically not much change here. In fact, I would probably move those down back to part of the code that they were in. Like that. No need to get away from vanilla, right? If they're doing it, we can do it. Gets us in trouble. Okay, so that's that. Callbacks were good. Okay, let's look at the triggers, the bleeding triggers. Bleeding triggers. This is the last little bit of code we got. So if I'm looking at these, I have you're having a reference to the trigger. Okay. Yeah, I would rename these things. From the name alone, it does not make sense that these are triggers, which makes it difficult for me to read through this in plain English just to know what's happening. So like, this is actually the trigger. Is it deactivated? Time since creation. Everything has an extent. That's how you make it large or small. You notice this one does not call it super. That might cause problems. It's the only one that doesn't, so there might be a bug there. The init's fine. Can add an object as an insider if it's player controlled, if the player's alive. Okay, that makes sense. Yep. Should remove insider. Is the player controlled and are they not alive? Okay. On stay. So when you stay and we begin, let's say server event. In case we heal, we're going to heal. For illness, we're going to remove illnesses. Okay. If they have a bleeding manager. Okay, so you're just basically looping 6 times to remove 6 bleeds at a time. Okay, that makes sense. I would make this configurable in some case. Maybe based on the trigger, or I mean, we have, ideally, we've defined our triggers, our MedKit triggers here, right, as the opened. Right, we could probably have some type of information here by like, something like that. And you can set it to 6, which allows you to change something along this line. Or the important part is to keep it generic, because while the bleeding trigger itself has a reference to the object, this would technically be a color-based object until you casted it to the specific object. The bleeding stopped, unleaved, we're fine there. Ooh, notification system, good call here. Notification system is awesome. We used to have mods for this, but vanilla added it. Is player controlled. I think you're looking for is controlled player. Vanilla has something along this line. Okay. This is important because when I'm on my client, I need to know if the player on the list is me or if it's another character. All right. And so this handles that. Otherwise, um, certain effects will just apply to everyone. Is player controlled. You're basically saying if I have an identity, I'm real. Interesting. How does vanilla handle this? Okay, no, you've made something yourself? What? Okay, you just have different spacing. It's like, what the heck? Okay, those are deprecated. Don't use those. That makes sense. Because, like, when I see that, I'm like, what? Monitor, it should be on stay. Should remove insider. Yeah, this is what's best right here. The should remove insider will handle the leaving and on enter. Bleeding trigger. Still not sold on this one here as well. Should remove insider. Okay, this is probably going to cause issues. Object is a keyword. I'm surprised that this is even working. Yeah, object is a keyword. It's reserved. You can't actually do this. You'd need to like rename it to this or something. Yeah, I don't think you need this. I don't know why you have this. Mainly because if you do a cast, you're doing a cast two things. This has an identity already, especially when you're looking at. Well, I guess when you look at insiders. What is this? Since creation is greater than the delay and the trigger is not deactivated, deactivate the trigger and then notify all the players. In which case you loop through everyone that's in it and send a notification to them. Yeah, so in this case, I would do something like this. If class.cast to player. At this point, I know I have a player. I'm done. If there's no identity, this will handle that anyway. There's no real need for this guy. I would try to avoid doing like making your own functions like this. Mainly because if you're having to make your own functions like this, it's usually indication that you're trying to go outside the intended workflow of like the objects and their interactions. The devs, uh, despite as many people like to say, the devs themselves are competent, actually highly competent. It's why they're working on a game that people play and actually makes money. So they also build their stuff in such a way that can be consumed by modders as well as the flow of the engine. And for newer people and for us that don't have full information of the engine, we can try to shoehorn things in like this, and this is what will cause highly fragile code in the end. Okay. So other than that, everything else is pretty good. So go ahead and watch this a couple times. I'm going to commit this under a new branch so that you can have all the code. This is pseudocode, so it might not work exactly as it is, but the concepts and ideas that I talked about are definitely things that are important that'll work. So I think the most complex thing that we did was this. I would call this a rework, not a refactor. We reworked the entire code and made it into something new. So um, feel free to watch it a couple times and ask any questions specifically about things. Thank you.